You okay?
Yes.
No Time to Die was the final outing for Daniel Craig. He was already wanting to get out of it 2 films ago, but stuck it out for a huge paycheck to do one last film. And what Broccoli and crew made up was actually one of the best Bond films to date. No Time to Die was one of the first films to move dates once COVID became a pandemic early on. It was one of the first realizations that this COVID thing wasn't just a flux, when Hollywood started changing dates. They brought on Cary Fukunaga to direct, a guy who directed TV episodes like True Detective, and then the Netflix feature Beast of No Nation with Idris Elba. I was hesitant at the choice of Fukunaga, I don't know. But early pics from the set looked pretty cool. They were shooting on big old 70mm IMAX film. Linus Sandgren's behind the camera. You got Hans Zimmer never taking just the paycheck, and the cast was looking great because they got Jeffrey Wright back. The old chap was missed for sure. So I'm here to answer the question if the most recent James Bond film, No Time to Die, is the best out of all of them. All the Daniel Craigs, the Sean Connerys, Roger Moores, every James Bond film. So, is it the best? No. I don't want to lie to everyone. I actually don't think that it is. It's almost too peculiar, a scotch too long, and has some weird moments that don't necessarily work for me. I think the best Bond title still has to go to Casino Royale for its reimagining in today's climate, or Skyfall, GoldenEye, Goldfinger, or License to Kill, with Honor Majesty's Secret Service being a strong wildcard. If you can't tell, I find it hard to declare favorites these days. It's just the newest and most relevant James Bond thing out there. While casting rumors for the next one lurk in the air, we've got time to breathe in between Bond films. Also, it gives me a chance to talk about one of my first film obsessions, the series as a whole. No Time to Die finds Bond and Madeleine Swann on a quiet affair. Some time has seemed to have elapsed since the previous. Swann has convinced Bond to reconcile with his past pain of Vesper Lind, so he visits her gravesite. The Spectre is still after him, and the plot unfolds. Apparently this recently aired on the telly in the UK for the first time, and many people were shocked by the ending. It's actually amazing how these spoilers never actually got out and stayed hidden. Nonetheless, everything's game here, so spoilers ahead. This one opens differently than the rest of them, probably because it's not a throwaway scene like many of the Bond cold opens are. Which, that's kind of what a lot of the old ones, like the Roger Moore and the openings, they just feel like SNL cold opens. They don't have any connection to the rest of the film. Which is one of the many things different. And Madeleine Swann is actually a character, a returning character even, which is one of the many things different about this film that I really dig. The diegetic music playing makes it feel like some 90s piece or just some indie filmmaker. It feels like Fukunaga or the writer really had a voice. I think what I love about it most is the way it embraces being number 25. What all the films have in common is a lack of cohesion. That's by design, I get it. The Craig-era films have tried, but some feel like they follow their preceding film much more than the others. Spectre haphazardly connected all of the Craig films, so it's on paper that they did. Not saying it did a great job of it, but the point is that there have been 5 Daniel Craig James Bond films. That's 15 years of bonding, pun intended. So when Bond falls in love after all this time, after being betrayed and turned bitter from his first love, it feels soothing. This action scene is one of the ages. First off, it starts with this ear explosion that actually subjects us to hearing loss in a realistic fashion. I appreciate Fukunaga's attention to that because most movies subject you to like 4-5 seconds of that high-pitched ringing noise, but here, His hearing, or lack of hearing, lasts much longer, and it's not just the ringing. This swing is nuts. The motorcycle stunt is nuts. The car looks amazing, come on, it's beautifully shot. This location is amazing. One thing here, this window would break from getting shot so much, or that guy would run out of ammunition. I'm not a stickler for these things always being realistic, but this feels too much like the movie forcing a beat here. I just realized I have no idea how to say this actress's last name. I don't think have I ever even heard it before? Wow. Well, Leah
Seydoux. Yes, a silent X there. Léa Seydoux.
Her performance is so great here. Her whimper gets me every time. It's a beautiful sequence, and again, it feels different than other Bond films. We almost forget that it's a Bond film when the opening credits finally begin. I really like Eilish's song here. Can't go wrong with innocent people getting shot. Even at the PG-13 level, seeing people gunned down like this is always going to get under my skin. It really sets the tone. This Russian MacGuffin guy reminds me of Boris from GoldenEye. I love the character that's being used by the antagonist. I was excited to hear Jeffrey Wright was returning, and his part in this film does not disappoint. The smiley guy was funny, but it felt odd for some reason, almost like an MCU quirky role. Maybe I'm desensitized to the MCU machine, that a role like this just reminds me of unfunny stuff. But I do laugh at this. Bond's finally going after women again.
Need I ride?
That could be seen as a backward thing, that I'm liking Bond on the prowl again, but I say it like a friend would. It's good to see you out again, man. Get back up on the horse. Go get that. Anyway, I love his interaction with Lashana Lynch. Her putting on an accent and asking where the bedroom is.
Is that the bedroom?
Are great moments. I think it's very cool to finally have an end-movie world building about the 00 program. That their number is just a title. I've always subscribed to the 00 and James Bond name being a title handed down through the ages at MI6. Kind of like the changing of the actor in film production. Same character, different body. Ana de Armas is great here. I like that we're seeing the world open up again, with more agents and co-ops like this. I definitely relate to everyone's frustrations with her having such little screen time, but I think it's a great little role. Any more, maybe it would have ruined it. Jeffrey Wright eats this scene up, come on. I'm just hitting the highlights quickly, and also the low points before I analyze why the whole thing works great as a whole within the series. This scene always feels weirdly written. The writer made it very clear to the audience that we would pay attention to Bond's actions and movements after we realized she touched him and got the virus on him. But it feels like they are stretching this moment to the max, trying to find an excuse for him to touch Blofeld at any means necessary. And I don't buy it at all.
Die, Blofeld.
But Blofeld is dead. Good. I like the idea of him, but the handling of him and Spectre was so piss poor, I'm kind of happy to see him croak. The forest scene is great. There's so much tension added here, with the inclusion of Madeline and her daughter. We've seen nothing like this in a Bond film before. The stakes are set. The scene borders the perfect escape and dead-eye shot of Blofeld's lab and Spectre, but I like this one more because the kills are just much more satisfying, and this shot is sick as hell. I love a good practical stunt and just seeing real things, being in real environments. It's all great. The ending is dope because we're back in a classic Bond villain lair. I mean, come on. It's a great mix of classic Bond and what the Daniel Craig films of, what they're known for. And the big thing about the film is that Bond dies. There. James Bond dies at the end of No Time to Die. It's not the fact that I cried in a James Bond film that makes me think about the film more. The Daniel Craig films really put the word legacy to use. These 5 films really feel like a legacy.
I'm not gonna make it.
I've always loved the James Bond films. GoldenEye was my first Bond film. I always thought I started watching them a bit too young, even with their PG-13 rating. Growing up in a fairly strict household, a little bit of sensuality was considered quite taboo. And that's what mostly drew me to these films, was the handling of sex in cinema. You know, maybe that rocked me off my rocking chair or rocking horse to grow up to be some sex-crazed dinosaur, not confusing consent or anything like that. But Daniel Craig films kind of made that their point of focus. How can Bond cope with women after women? They've come to the answer that his life as a double agent reflects his love life, and that the idea of him settling down is just never going to happen. It could never happen. The films that are most interesting to me all rely on how good the Bond girl is. The Bond girl characters are widely diverse. Some last a scene, some sex them up for the bad guy, some are victims, and some are questionable. Listen, I gotta get this off my chest. I'll be honest. Sean Connery is probably my least favorite James Bond. He's the most problematic out of all the Bond figures. Please don't come at me like I don't understand what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about, but you gotta understand, my feelings have changed as I've aged. Brosnan was my favorite for a while just because that was my introduction to him. The World Is Not Enough was my favorite Bond film for the longest time, mostly because Denise Richards. Well, a little, but more Denise Richards. Okay, yeah. She was a great, classic sexy Bond girl that knew her way around a sex pun. But that film... I was just waiting to see if I'm gonna get cut off again. It was just Denise Richards. Jesus, okay, right. I wasn't that obsessed with her until I saw Wild Things, but that's besides the point. The World Was Not Enough was simply action-packed. There was hardly any downtime. Each action scene was so diverse and different, and had like 4 sex scenes in it. That's very cool. To go way back, even before I even started watching the James Bond films, Timothy Dalton was more or less my introduction to Bond as a character. Not necessarily in any of the films, though. I'll explain. Anybody seen Looney Tunes back in action? To get my ranking out of the way, Daniel Craig is probably my favorite. Then it goes Pierce Brosnan, Timothy Dalton, Roger Moore, and then Sean Connery. And then George Lazenby, and I can hear you already. On Her Majesty's Secret Service sits very special in my heart, so much so, it might be worth it to make just a separate video just on that. Lazenby's last because he was only in one film. I actually liked him quite a bit. These films built up a story over 5 films. The James Bond series isn't about connectivity, but Casino Royale changed that. They gave it a shot. The film moved me in the end, yes, but because I'd never heard James Bond say these words.
But I'm not going to leave here without you knowing that I have loved you, and I will love you, and I do not regret a single moment of my life that led me to you.
That's the last thing you'd expect from a James Bond film. But this legacy was about deconstructing the character. It really was. We forget how good Casino Royale is, how soft-spoken some huge character moments are between the hard-hitting action. The character of Bond feels like he carries weight now. There are actually consequences and repercussions in the world. He's got a child, for Christ's sake. I love that addition. They could have had Bond retire because of his daughter. I think audiences would have allowed that. But they decided to kill him because at the end of the day, Bond is a soldier. He's still expendable. He's just a number. These films were never about anything back in the day. There's something to those classic films, yes. Something that makes them timeless in that regard. Good guy versus bad guy type things. But the world will just keep getting more and more complicated. So films need to reflect that change. These films are about masculinity, relationships, and betrayal, agency to king and country, your past, moving on, and even about death, how his legacy will live on. I'll quickly mention I realize Fukunaga is under fire for grooming and other misconduct, but that's not exactly something I wanted to cover in this. I'm just stating that I am aware and don't condone that. I appreciate No Time to Die for going for it. Boldness in film should be admired first and foremost. Maybe it doesn't work for you. I think it creates a lot more of an interesting film to make strong choices and decisions. No Time to Die made a number of bold choices. To that, I salute you. It's a good life, isn't it? I still hope to make video essays like this. It's sort of a mix and a guess of what will do well. There are plenty of old French and Italian films I could talk for hours about, but I don't think the return would be worth it to talk like an annoying YouTuber, so I'm trying to find a good balance of underrated, undervalued, and overlooked films that still have a decent audience. Anyway.
No more foreplay.
This has been Andrew. Check out my Letterboxd and other videos. I got a new podcast interview series going, and some short films that are going to be coming out soon that I made. So, alright. See ya.